Okay, so welcome everyone to our Study Abroad podcast series. So today we have Shakul from MIT, who is also from IIT Kharagpur, and then he went to MIT. So we'll be knowing about his journey from IIT to MIT. So welcome, Shakul.
Yeah. Thank you for the welcome, Vishal.
So Shakul, when was the very first time you thought that maybe there is something called abroad?
So this was specifically a certain point in my undergrad life. So when I was in my second year, the idea of research started taking birth in my head. I was starting to think about the fact that so I continued in chemical engineering. I entered in the chemical engineering program at KGP, and I was at that point still a little unsure. I was thinking about shifting to other departments. I had the choice to change my department to electrical. I continued in chemical. I started liking the subjects in my third semester. And at that point, I was like, okay, I want to do some research. I joined a couple labs in my department. And then I came to know that a lot of the cutting edge research, specifically in the areas I was interested in, at the interface of nanotechnology and micro scale physics, and those things was being done in places that were abroad. And I decided then to start exploring around and went for a couple internships, which I can definitely talk about here and there. And that led to a whole new dimension opening up, new explorations in other parts of the world, and meeting people who are really at the top of their field with specifically good facilities and faculties.
Sure, sure. So these internships that you did, what were the places that you did this internship? You can just tell us briefly a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So my first internship was quite strongly focused on the same areas I mentioned, microfluidics and nanotechnology associated areas. So I was working in the Science for Life laboratory in the Alpha division in the country of Sweden. I got an offer from there through basically interviews conducted online by them. The opportunity was posted on the international relations cell of IIT Kharagpur, which was pretty new at that point. And I decided to apply through them, and I got in, and I went for the summer subsequent to that second year. And this was the summer of 2018 year, and it was a 6 week program, and I learned a lot about different microfluidic techniques in the lab. Additionally, I got to know how to do basic like research related things while working in a less risky sort of environment where I could actually play around with a lot of expensive equipment in the lab. Yeah.
Sure, sure. So this was 6 weeks in Sweden. 6 weeks in Sweden. So this was fully funded or partially funded? How was the funding thing for this?
Yeah, so this was kind of partial situation. So I was not covered for only the flight part, but the rest was sort of like quite covered. And this was also like something that I decided to do in the very beginning when I did not have a lot of experience. So it made sense to not get a ton of funding for that. Later on, I realized there were some other opportunities I could have applied for, but I was too new back then. So, yeah, it was a little bit of a net negative from my side.
Sure, sure. I think it's like internships where the first one might be unpaid and then you get a little bit more pay and then you get
Yeah.
fully paid and maybe then you get paid, as good as an employee. So it's always a
Yes,
stages
exactly.
of
Yeah, that's how like
internship.
it's the nucleation starting point, and then you sort of expand from there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So after doing this Sweden thing, it was like a course plus internship kind of thing, a course plus project work. You did any other internship in subsequent years?
Yeah, so once I got experience there in working in a lab, in a wet lab, trying to develop microfluidic devices. So the end goal back there was to try and figure out how one can separate out certain kind of like cells from others. These cells would be correlated to tumors or other diseases. The next goal was in my head to given the understanding that I am probably not a wet lab person, more of a simulation and modeling person, was to also explore that part. As a part of that, I shifted around labs within IIT Kharagpur. I started thinking about my bachelor's thesis. At the same time, I also started thinking about more opportunities abroad in my summer again, but this time more focused and paid so that I can like sort of explore that side of things. Subsequently, I went for a MyTax Global Link internship in the summer of 2019 in the Simon Fraser University in Burnaby in Canada. I worked on a lot of theoretical ideas because this was literally in the Department of Physics there, and I was supported by the my tax fund. So it was entirely like supported by them. So in fact, I was net positive after that. I gained more than I lost. And overall, it was a great experience learning about theoretical concepts around enzymes at the cell level and how they function under highly nanoscopic conditions where you have like additional forces aside from purely like classical forces. Like there are some statistical mechanical effects at force, which is slightly beyond what we learn in like day to day more macro scale engineering, and that got me very interested, the math of that and how that works at the enzyme level and how nature has its own way to ensure that it's obeying the laws of thermodynamics, but then again not under certain conditions, but again on an average it does. So all those things were new to me, and it was a great experience. So that was my second. And then later on there was a third one where it was COVID hit in 2020, so I did not actually go there, but I remotely worked on an internship uh, with like the support of again the IIT KGP Foundation of USA for funding, but actually the funding was not really needed because I was still in India, and this was with a lab in UC Berkeley, where I was working remotely on machine learning assisted solutions of partial differential equations. uh, and that was relatively new back then, but now it's like all over the place. Yeah.
Sure, sure.
So
So
this,
Sweden, first you did in Sweden, second you did in
yeah,
Canada, and third you wanted to do in
yeah,
US, but that was a remote one. So finally you
yeah.
decided that.
That turned into a remote one, unfortunately. Yeah,
So to compensate for that, finally you decided that let's go to US to compensate for that unforgotten loss.
yeah. In some ways, I did decide to aim for US universities when I applied beyond by 2020. During that phase only, so COVID was full on while I was applying around and all that. But yes, that's true that I did focus on US as a part of my applications.
Sure, sure. So, and once you are focusing on US, how many colleges, universities did you focus on? How many applications did you fill that time?
So a total of eight plus one. So I am telling a plus one, I'll explain that. So eight applications were all across different parts of the US, primarily the East and West Coast universities. Since I came in with a like by like with being in one of the top like two to three students in the class where I was graduating, uh, I was quite confident that I am in a spot academically where I could like to keep my application separate. Also, I had all these experiences, and I had like by then actually from my master's thesis, I already had, since I did a double bachelor's and master's program in IIT Kharagpur, so I am calling it my master's thesis. I already had like one paper, and I was another in preparation, so I was quite confident. So I applied to all other top schools only, mostly both in West and East Coast, and plus one because I also applied to one institution in the UK, which is the Imperial College London. And the reason for that was they had very good theory and modeling focused labs that I was interested in. Yeah. So, including that, I applied to nine places around.
And out of these nine places, what was your strike rate?
It was four. Yeah. So I got a solid admit from four. I got interview from two more. So I got like total of six, but I got solid admits for four and interviews from six. Yeah.
And some of them were like fully funded, partially funded. How was the scholarship associated with it?
So that's a great question. I think so. Given my finances, I was sure that I will not be able to go for a partially funded situation in the US specifically because it's super expensive in that case. So I only applied to fully funded PhD programs in both US and UK. Also, actually, Imperial would have been fully funded. Yeah, and I would say that that was in hindsight a very good decision after coming here.
Sure, sure. So finally, you chose MIT and you discarded the rest. What were the major reasons for discarding the rest?
Yeah. So the rest I was accepted from. I'll try not to name them so that they don't like sort of feel bad or something. But there were some equally good universities. In fact, like maybe on similar levels where I got interviews from or where I got accepted from, and I was not at some point like focused on them after I got into MIT. The main reason being that I felt that the labs here one and second thing the fact that I would get to have the freedom to play around with where I end up working in which MIT is another feature of MIT where like you enter chemical engineering but you can also work with a professor in mechanical or physics. Also the financial parts of it, like MIT pays relatively much better than in the PhD, like the stipend we get, the RA ship and everything combined, it's like significantly better than other institutes that were on the table. So both like the brand value, obviously, but also like the labs which are there, which are a good balance of bio. So I was since I had experience both in bio and fluid mechanics. I was trying to balance between the two in terms of labs available. So MIT had that good balance of labs. MIT had that good financial incentive compared to other institutions. And also MIT was within the top few. And combining all these three, it was only MIT, no other institution that came close to hitting all these three brackets.
Okay, okay. So that's where the MIT is always maybe the number one or the number one choice for most people.
Yeah, that's true. It is often ranked number one in the US news rankings or QS rankings. Yeah.
So it was also like IIT to MIT was the best transition you could have, right?
Yeah, it's
Hitting
like
all the.
everyone wants that kind of IIT to IIM to MIT or IT to MIT, something like that. So yeah, but those things are norms. I, as a person, do not entirely believe in norms. I do go with a reasoning based approach. And in
Hmm.
this case, it made all sense because of all these three buckets.
And you chose your professor before coming there only, or you chose your supervisor after coming
Yeah.
there?
That is a great question. I would say it depends on the institution where you are going. In case of MIT, specifically chemical engineering, again, within that departments might be different. For chemical engineering, it is you don't choose a professor, you enter and then you find your lab. Also, you find your lab within the end of or start of end of first semester, start of the second semester of your being here, which is quite distinct. For example, compared to Stanford where you have like lab rotations. So in MIT, it's like you don't know. In Stanford also you don't know, but you go in and you have many rotations. In MIT, you don't know. You go in, you finalize a lab, you go there. That's it. You don't have like these old rotations and everything. So but this is chemical engineering. It can be different in mechanical or material science.
Okay. So for chemical engineering, it's always the norm that you come like as a blank paper and then you fill your lab or supervisor after coming there, not the other way around.
Uh, mostly. I'll say there might be some institutions that have a separate system, but mostly in the US, that's true. In Europe, that's totally not true. Yeah.
Sure, sure. But usually with this offer, you get this TA and RA, right? Which is probably under a professor that you are, helping a professor for the TA or
Yeah.
RA. kind of thing. So that way your professor might be fixed in terms of that part-time job which converts as scholarship. So in your case, you had a TARA kind of thing.
That's a great point. So uh, generally, top schools have in your first year some sort of endowment, donation, or fellowship based funding. Like so, different. So in my case, actually, I came to know after my first year that I was funded by a specific fellowship in my first year. So in that case, you don't have to be attached to a PI. And but from second year onwards, when you are officially on roll with a professor's lab, uh, they would have to be on your uh, payroll. Yeah.
Okay, okay, sure. So for the audience sake, could you also explain them the difference between fellowship, scholarship, RATA in like a sentence or so?
Yeah, so TA is basically the teaching assistantship, which is some sort of like work-based money you're getting. So you're spending some time out of your research on teaching students in a class setting. This class can be a lab class. This class can be a more theoretical class, pen paper maybe. And what you are doing is since you're spending all that time every week, you are going to get some part of your stipend or all of your stipend funded through TA. The rest is often RA, or all of it could be RA if you are not doing a TA, which is coming from for often for international students where our interest lies. It's often going to come from basically funding through grants professors write. So professors are always all the time writing grant proposals to companies or organizations such as Department of Energy in the US, for example. There are many others to like obtain this, secure this funding, and then once they have this funding pool, from that they pull out money and give it to students, and that is where your RA comes from. In cases where there is no such grant supporting you, the RA can also come from additional funds the department may have in reserve for cases where there are no grants operating in a lab. Um, and then finally, fellowship is something you apply for. So international students generally have significantly lower fellowship opportunities compared to domestic students. But still, you could apply to certain organizations that care for something. Like, for example, you're working on water pollution and you apply to a certain fellowship that does that or cares for that, then you can get a part or all of your stipend funded by that fellowship for a certain amount of time. So some fellowships fund you for 3 years, some fellowship fund you for 1 year, some fellowship as maybe as short as a semester, but that supports you without having to go through that whole RA plus TA combination. So these three are typical like routes of getting some sort of funding.
Sure, sure. And apart from this, some students also do part-time job and like part-time internships here and there. Did you also try any
Yeah.
of those?
Since I have no requirement, I don't need to do that since I'm like fully funded for using my RA. In fact, partially I have a fellowship right now for some reasons, but I otherwise, if it was needed, I would consider that. But then again, there are restrictions on how long you can work in a week on an F1 visa. That is the typical visa people are on when they are here. So that definitely has to be taken into account, and accordingly, you would have an upper limit on how much you can make.
Sure, sure. But like your peers or like your juniors here and there, you would have seen them working in some or the other part-time jobs, right? Could you just give some examples?
Uh, at MIT, I have not seen so many, but I have seen like in I know friends around in Boston who might have uh, spent some time on uh, uh, either like in like they could be like teaching in some other setting, like maybe teaching students within the city, maybe about on some subjects. There might be other kind of work they might be doing in some establishment, for example. So those kind of things are there. I mean, definitely. But again, that hour limit is there, so they do that within that hour limit. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Did you also do any summer job, summer internship kind of thing during like a summer break, or you took like one term off or something?
So I did take one term out, but this was not out of my program. It was still a feature in my program. So chemical engineering at MIT allows you to spend an entire semester working in two companies. In my case, it was Schlumberger and AstraZeneca. One in energy sector, one in pharma sector. Schlumberger is actually now called SLB. So SLB and AstraZeneca experience was a part of the chemical engineering practice school program in chemical engineering department of MIT, where you don't have to get out of your, like, sort of take a break from a program or anything. It's built into your sort of degree, uh, that is a master's degree that basically gives you an opportunity to go to these companies, get paid roughly the same as your PhD. So you are not getting paid a lot more. Uh, but at the same time, you will be covered for your food, accommodation, travel, everything to these places where you'll be working. And you will get some industry experience in the professional context in America. And then you come back. And after you have done this whole thing and done like two additional courses, apart from what you have to do as a part of your PhD, you can get a master's in chemical engineering practice. So, chemical engineering department of MIT has this practice school program for practice of chemical engineering, and it's supposed to train you in practical knowledge for where you apply these concepts in industrial context in America. So that's a, or it can be like in some cases outside of America also. It can be a mix actually. But that whole thing is the practice school, and I did that. So that is where I was not there directly in my program, and you could call it a break semester or something from my direct involvement in my research here at MIT.
Sure, sure, sure. So you studied in India for a while, then you did internship in Sweden, you did internship in Canada, and then you did a remote internship with UC Berkeley, and then you are studying and doing research at MIT. How do you see the cultural difference of the way the education system or the research labs are in these places?
Yeah. So yeah, I have worked in labs across countries, and there are some key differences, I will say. Since I have worked less in experimental settings and more in theoretical modeling settings, and maybe some of the differences might not be that clear to me, that are more like on that side. But I can summarize them in like a few things. So the first thing is that um, I think the overall drive behind doing research in both cases is uh, like quite similar in that there is that curiosity component of it. So in the reason why we do research in, let's say, labs in any geography actually has some level of curiosity, but I think here there is that curiosity component, and there is an equally important, maybe sometimes more, sometimes less, but roughly similarly important component in the US that people care about, and that is the industrial part of it. Since we are like engineers, I think that part comes in a lot. In back home in the IITs, in like there, I felt a little bit more of a greater focus on theoretical things, more like uh, more math, more physics, but then connecting it back to the real world, seeing how it affects the average life of a human being or something like that. Since at the end of the day, we are not scientists, we are engineers. All that was not a big focus back there. So that why I'm doing this was is a little different in the two countries. The other thing is that uh, the culture around accepting new people, whether they come from any background. So it can be like they're coming from a less chemical engineering background but want to do chemical engineering. Maybe they're coming from some other completely different like background. Maybe they did finance and they want to do this. I mean, people are very open here, like to teach and help them out, although there are time resource constraints that by nature you will have. but people are always willing to support even trying to transition there. In the back in India, I felt there was this a little bit of like thing where you feel very expert and specialized in a certain area, and when someone is like, there is this a bigger, slightly bigger barrier to entry into that specialization. That's a little bit of like new thing, and you will face that barrier. You'll see that, okay, this is so, there's so much new thing, there's so many new things, so that communication gap might be lower here in that sense compared to there. And finally, I think that teaching aspect of it, because I think research, a big part of it is also teaching, is the teaching might be actually similar in terms of maybe difficulty, and maybe a little more difficult in India actually. Like back in India, I felt the courses were much more difficult, but the feedback mechanisms here are very rapid and fast. So if you have a problem, if you have something, you just tell that, and then it immediately gets like seeps into the thing, seeps into the class, and then you are heard, and then people just try to fix it, and they take very seriously that part. In India, it's like it's your problem kind of thing. So it's like those kind of things like around, because I feel teaching and research are so closely connected. I had to mention that. So to summarize, it's like teaching, it's like the culture around why I am doing this, and yeah. So that those things, those two things, I think are very important to consider. Yeah,
Sure, sure.
in
So,
seeing the differences. Yeah.
correct, correct. So you mentioned in the very early part of the conversation, and I think this is a very common problem that a lot of people, especially at IITs, get department based on their rank. And initially, they might be thinking, that I'm maybe stuck here. I didn't want this. I
Yeah.
wanted something else. And then what we have also seen that, let's say, some of the people maybe opting out of it, doing MBA, this, that, like deviating from it. But then there are others who ultimately fall in love with the subject and eventually end up doing masters or PhD. Which, so your case is the second case. So when was the
Yes.
turning point when the hatred became the love?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had an entire part of my life dedicated to hatred for chemical engineering. So my first semester at IIT, when I entered after my JE, was like I could have done so much better and maybe gotten into a much better department, better in terms of job opportunities, better in terms of pay and classiness. Like you are, if you're CS or electrical, you have like EC or CS specifically, you have like that new that side, like that you have gone past the thousand, within thousand range or within something like that, and it's like, but I think uh, I once I so there that was one part of me that was like, okay, maybe I don't, that I did not, I deserved it, I did not get it, so I wanted to reach that level. So I worked very hard in my first year to reach that level to be able to change my department. So that cleared off one part of my head. The second part that was still in my head was, okay, I mean, what do I do once I enter such a program? That was not never something that I thought about. I only thought about it as something I needed because everyone needed it, wanted it. It was hot and it was a great area to get a lot of money and payment and everything. And then I decided to talk to the fifth year in our department, chemical engineering, who was going to graduate, and and then there was another two fourth years I talked to back then who were also graduating. And out of the three people I talked to, two were going to pursue a PhD, and I just tried asking them what is their mentality behind it, what was their thought process, why did they want to do it. And when I realized that they really liked the subjects, and then I asked them, why do you like the subject? Why do you want to do this? And they mentioned the facts that, chemical, mechanical, they are more like real things based subjects where you have like a little bit of more, uh, uh, less abstraction compared to electrical engineering, where it's more abstract a little bit in terms of like how theory and all those things go. I realized that I did not want to do a lot of that. Also, my first year, I did a lot of coding. I was very good at it. But then I was not super passionate about it. After working on it for quite some time, I realized that was not something I would do and lose track of time. So But when I would do math problems around fluid mechanics or something, I would lose track of time. So I was like, okay, this probably is a sign that I should continue in this department. So I continued and I stayed in the top of the department, sort of, and try to maintain that rather than enter the circuit departments and sort of like maybe try there. Yeah, looking back, it all worked out well. Yeah,
So your first year was kind of an experiment where you tried lot of things, spoke to a
yes,
lot of
yeah,
seniors.
it was
Is that?
experiment and a lot of studying for GPA and everything. Yeah,
And also talking to seniors, so they help
yeah,
you, like sort
yeah,
of decide or not
yeah,
decide. Like, so it was
yeah,
like a bit of like a dating kind of. You dated various options, and then you decide, okay, this is the option I can get married to probably. So I choose
yeah,
this.
yeah. I made
And
myself
finally, you are there.
eligible to change my department, and then I talked to a lot of people.
Yeah, and then you decided that let's be one of the topper of my department rather than
Yeah,
mediocre of other departments.
yeah, exactly, exactly. In terms of GPA, that's true. Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. So, yeah, very good, Shakul. So, coming to the very last question. So, this confusion that you went through, right? This is the confusion with, like, let's say, most IITians or NITians or even triple IITians at times, probably, or, the toppers, for example, of various colleges where they get things based on their rank and because of the brand name or parental pressure or the society
Mm.
pressure they take. And ultimately, they are not able to, like, either survive with the subject or they do disaster or they fall in love. So, what let's say you may have done some mistakes also in that whole process, or you may have done it differently. If somebody speak to you now, what advice would you give to the first year, let's say first year IIT KGPNs for that matter? How should they decide if the department they are in is the correct, or they should go for a depth change, or maybe take a drop year or something, like according to you, like your own view on this?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Again, so wow, you're asking good questions. So I'll just say that like on this note, it's it's a very so when you choose, that choice is yours. So the one thing you should remember is you have the ability to choose uh actually like to a good extent when you are like suppose you are in your first year and you want to stay, leave, do something else, just to forget about department change. You can even like stay in the same department and focus on something entirely different, get a passing grade, do something else. Right. So the world is huge. There is this first year phase that you think there are like 19 departments. I can just like do something around that only. But in truth, it's huge. So I think the best part of first year that I did and that I would tell them to do is number one is explore. Explore as much as possible. Go around, talk to not only your first year batchmates who are in that JE mentality still, but also like to the final year ones who have seen more of life. Get to know their perspective, talk to them, know that like there are so many things outside of the program also once you are graduated will come for you. And then secondly, be free in your choice kind of at that point still because you're still very young. Actually, people I would pay anything today to go back to that time again so that I can get that sort of freedom of choice because it keeps getting a little narrower as you go up in the hierarchy. So that was a very good time actually. So if you go back there, if you are there, you are at a spot where you still have a lot of options. So make sure you are observing them. So exploring will allow you to observe them. The second thing is to choose. So after that, just think about like right now, given where you are, what is the best thing to do and that much only. Don't overthink it too much. Like, don't try to extrapolate to 10 years. Extrapolate to just 2 years or maybe 1 year. Think about it in the short run. Things will slowly open up and then go for it. Like, don't overthink too much. Like, oh, I should have do that or this. This is a good enough thing. You think it's worth it. You think you want to do this, just go for it and there might be restrictions like suppose you could not get a GPA that was sufficient for changing to CS, for example. That doesn't stop you from doing CS. Actually, you can still do it. Okay, it becomes a little harder, but I think it's that part of you that has to develop where I will still get that thing done eventually because I know my own batchmates in chemical engineering who wanted to do like data or machine learning or software associated jobs. And they eventually went into that, even if they did not do a department change. So, I mean, and now they're completely in that field. Some are even building startups on that. So it's like, it's not, it's not going to restrict you that much as you think. So at that point, I would say explore, choose, and go for it are my three things to tell to the first years of KGP and other institutions.
Sure, sure. Thank you very much, Shakul, for all your insights and your experience and the way you chose your department and ultimately you chose to do PhD in chemical engineering. And we hope a lot of our IITian fellows, juniors, and even like other college people who are thinking about all this, that they're stuck, this, that, can get a bit of a clarity using all this tips and tricks. So have a good day, Shakul. It was very nice talking to you. Enjoy your day.
Yeah, thank you, Vishal. Thank you for the opportunity. It was really nice discussing also.
Bye.